Warmth and love of the Bible School at Manuka and Mississauga West Ecclesia in particular from some of our recent journeys. So in the spirit of reconciliation, which is the theme this morning, I'd like to acknowledge that we're meeting on Kaurna country, a land never ceded and continues to hold a deep meaning for the Kaurna people today. And I wonder if Abraham and his family developed the same type of bond to the Promised Land. It's a strong theme throughout the whole Bible. And today we're going to explore some themes of reconciliation within families. So a long time ago, there was a nice Christian family living in a small but functional house in the growing northwestern suburbs of Sydney. The mother and father were happy to have some children, but a medical condition prevented them from having any more. After prayerful consideration, the couple decided to adopt a child. Now, 50 years ago, it was still quite common to adopt a child in Australia. Single mothers or mothers with medical problems or any number of reasons put their children up for adoption. The process, by and large, seemed at the time beneficial to everybody. So this couple decided to grow their family and help community. They adopted an Aboriginal girl from northern New South Wales, from the Bundjalung country, which is around Lismore, and the girl was loved by that couple and her new siblings, loved to bits. And I should know because I'm talking about my sister. A beautiful bundle of cheeky joy entered our lives and did nothing but enrich every aspect of our lives. She had this amazing head of 80s style natural curls. She could dance, she could do complex maths in her head, and her most remarkable talent was the way she could swim. She was like a fish. We had a pool back in the day, above ground, plastic-lined sort of pool. It was pretty big, or at least I remember it as big, and deep enough for us kids. Dad had even built a decking around it so we could get a really good run up and jump in. Mum hated us riding bikes and billy carts into the pool because it would wreck the lining or something, so we never did that. One time our long-haired sausage dog fell in. It had not been washed for a while and the water started to go this really funky colour. And somehow, my sister was always right there. And one family holidays to the Flinders Ranges, which was a long way from our hometown of Sydney, we were allowed to stand on the roof of the combi to get a better view. The first up there was my sister. The first to find peaches at Uncle Russ's orchard. The first to catch Auntie Lorna's chickens, and the only one of us not scared to do so. I remember loads of great times together. And although she had a different origin story to me, I knew she was unique, and unique in a good way. And we never saw her as different. Back then, I had no knowledge of the stolen generations. Nobody did. And even now, I'm not sure if she was one of the ones who was taken or if she was willingly given for adoption. Probably stolen. So, even though I never saw her as different, she did. And by the age of 15 or 16, she wanted to tread a new path, a path towards her birth family and their community. My sister walked out of home, and I've barely seen her since. It was a really traumatic time for all of us, and I remember how hard my parents took it. I remember the determination, without any malice, of my sister at the time. It was a time of enormous family upheaval, and I felt lost. I was about 20, you know, that time of life when you're really quite sure of everything, and suddenly I had no clue what to do. I lost my sister, my parents became pretty bitter about it, and my brothers had less clue of what to do than I did. So, what did we do? As the dust settled, pretty much we never talked about it. That's how things were done, because it was hard to bring back people together who don't really want to be back together. We never really achieved reconciliation as a family over the years. I've had intermittent contact with my sister, but not enough to fix things. Reconciliation is not something that happens in one conversation. It takes a lot of time. Reconciliation in a family takes motivation for reconciliation and time. Remember Joseph from Genesis? Of course you do. At least 10 of his brothers were extremely mean to him and sold him to slavers. That was a pretty big deal. It absolutely wrecked their father, and it emphasised the undercurrents of tension in that family. Meanwhile, Joseph's life kept happening to him, often seemingly completely out of his control. He was a trusted leader in a great house, then suddenly in jail for sexual crimes that he did not commit. Then he ran the prison. Then, after interpreting dreams, he became Prime Minister for the most powerful nation in the world. Then he met his 10 brothers who had debated to kill him or sell him to slavers. So Joseph had a choice to make. Kill them all in vengeance, expose their scheming to the Pharaoh and have them locked up forever, or reconcile their differences and start a new phase of life together. So he chose reconciliation, but it didn't happen immediately. The road to reconciliation included feasting and abundance and more prison time and false accusations and truth-telling with their father, expressions of wrath and expressions of sacrifice, concern, fear, heartache and joy. It was a hard road for all of them. Reconciliation in a family takes motivation for reconciliation, time, truth-telling conversations, and forgiveness. Sometimes we look at Joseph and talk about all the divine intervention and guidance, that it all worked out well for everybody, that God never let anybody down. And do you know what? I think it was a bit harder than that. I think Joseph's life, and certainly the life of his family, was really, really messy. And it's okay when life is messy. It was okay for Joseph, and it's okay for us too. You know, I've heard people talk about Jesus' ministry, how it was so perfectly constructed. Everything was achieved at the perfect time and in logical sequence. And certainly it's easy to get that impression. If you look at John's Gospel, he creates a series of images and uses signs or miracles as punctuation through his record. It's very orderly. It shows a clear progression. Matthew expresses the two key teaching styles of Jesus, action and dialogue, separately to help enhance our understanding. Very ordered. And Luke leads us through a considered and well-paced account. After all, he was trying to convince one of his friends of the importance of Jesus. But the Gospel of Mark, to me, it's a hot mess. There's constant motion, there's urgency, there's seemingly unrelated observations, there's dialogue and action all thrown in together because life is like that. If you ever want to be reassured that it's okay to feel as if you're careering from one thing to the next, read the Gospel of Mark. So let's spend just a little bit of time in the Gospel of Mark, between Mark 8 and 10. So in those chapters, Jesus predicts his death 3 times. This is a huge thing, and Mark picks up on this 3 times. These are clear markers for us in the middle of the book. If this was one of the other gospel writers or one of Paul's letters, we would see some sort of theme of the stories between these markers. We'd see some sort of progression. So in Mark chapter 8, verse 31, "And he began to teach them that the Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And he said this plainly. And Peter took him aside and began to rebuke him." You know, Jesus didn't need Peter to start telling him off. Jesus was after understanding and support. And the second time is in Mark chapter 9, verse 30. "They went on from there and passed through Galilee. And they did not want anyone to know, for he was teaching his disciples, saying to them, 'The Son of Man is going to be delivered into the hands of men, and they will kill him. And when he is killed, after 3 days, he will rise.' But they did not understand the saying, and they were afraid to ask him. And once again, his closest friends missed their golden opportunity to offer Jesus support. And in between these predictions of his death and his cries for support, which they missed, there is, if you flick through, there's a really hard saying about taking up your own cross. There's talk of the kingdom. There's the transfiguration. There's some disciples failing to heal somebody. There's the healing of a boy with epilepsy, and Jesus talking about a spirit. The third time he predicts his death is in Mark chapter 10, verse 32, just before our reading today. "And they were on the road going up to Jerusalem, and Jesus was walking ahead of them. And they were amazed, and those who followed were afraid. And taking the 12 again, he began to tell them what was happening to him, saying, 'See, we are going up to Jerusalem, and the Son of Man will be delivered over to the chief priests and scribes, and they will condemn him to death and will deliver him to the Gentiles, and they will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him. And after 3 days he will rise.' And in between this second and third time he mentions his death came the settling of an argument about greatness, correcting John about who can cast out demons, proverbs about things that can keep you out of the kingdom, a legal discussion about divorce, lessons about having time with children, a story about riches blinding us from the kingdom, and rewards for his followers." So apart from a bit of a kingdom theme around it, these stories, sayings, actions and miracles, to me, they're not related. Despite Mark giving us these fantastic bookmarks in his gospel, Jesus predicting his own death in no uncertain terms, I can see no real literary pattern in what he was writing. So here's what I think. Mark did that on purpose. For all of us looking for well thought out themes, looking for cohesion and plans, looking for a coordinated message within a narrative, Mark chose to give us a mess. Unconnected thoughts and actions which just happened to Jesus and his family. Because we can relate to that. We intrinsically get it. We try to control things and we can't. We try to plan and it might not work out. Everything said and done before death is hard to control and often really messy. Of course, there is a string that holds it together, and that was that Jesus didn't change. His attitudes and behaviour, irrespective of the situation, was the same. Supportive, loving, firm when needed. But all around him was the usual mess that comes with interactions between people. In Mark 10, our reading today, we find that immediately after Jesus predicted his rather gruesome death for the third time, two of his closest friends demanded a guaranteed favour. So in verse 35 we read, "And James and John, the sons of Zebedee, came up to him and said to him, 'Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you.' And he said to them, 'What do you want me to do for you?' And they said to him, 'Grant us to sit one at your right hand and one at your left in your glory.'" What was this? They completely missed the prediction of Jesus' death. Tone deaf to Jesus' words about how horrible it was going to be for him, these two were now trying to get one up on Peter. After all, Peter was the only other disciple present at the Transfiguration, the only other one already to have seen Jesus in his glory. So they figured they'd better move quickly and secure the best spots before Peter got a foot in the door. And my version, 41, says that the 10 were indignant with James and John. I bet they were indignant. They would have been fiercely angry, especially Peter. So life in our families can be messy, just like Mark has observed in his Gospels. People miss things, like the clear distress Jesus was expressing when predicting his death on no less than 3 occasions, like the tone-deaf approach of getting something for yourself at the expense of others, like James and John. Sometimes we simply get things wrong. And reconciliation in a family takes motivation for reconciliation, time, truth-telling conversations, forgiveness, and an ability to recognise when we get things wrong. And of course, we couldn't talk about reconciliation without having a look at Esau and Jacob. So this is back in Genesis 27. So Jacob was a strong man in many ways. He could wrestle an angel all night. He was also skilled at looking after a household. But he was afraid of his brother. After all, Esau had vowed to kill him. In Genesis 27, Verse 41, now Esau hated Jacob because of the blessing with which his father had blessed him. And Esau said to himself, the days of mourning for my father are approaching. Then I will kill my brother Jacob. We know why. Esau felt deceived by Jacob, who had taken all the blessing from their father Isaac. Jacob, instead of waiting around to be killed, fled and spent the next 20 years with Laban, growing his family and his wealth, all the while having that niggling anxiety about his brother. And now we find Jacob's back in the same land, and he was going to meet Esau, one of the strongest warlords in the country. Jacob spent his anxious energy preparing his tactics, splitting up his family to minimise loss, choosing a huge gift for his brother, practising bowing and grovelling. If he was still alive by the time he met his brother, he would focus on getting away as soon as possible. And so he worried, and he planned, and he worried. Meanwhile, Esau, he'd just returned from watching the footy down at the Oval. A few beers and one black eye later, he'd staggered home, propped up by a couple of his equally roughed-up sons. Lost again was the wail, as the smaller and more sober people of the camp smartly scattered from the oncoming storm. More beer and another black eye finally led to some nocturnal calm in this harsh landscape. The clear light of morning found the chaos of last night was completely overshadowed by hundreds and hundreds of animals. Goats, sheep, camels, donkeys, you name it, they were all here. And the herdsmen were telling his sore head that they were all from his brother. Wait a minute, his brother? Finally, he was going to meet him again. Suit up, men. My brother is coming to say hello. He might have a lot of farm animals, but I have 400 battle-hardened men. The time has come. Esau had paused on the crest of a hill. 400 seemingly uncontrollable savages behind him, blades catching the morning light like crashing white waves in a rapidly rising river. A flood about to be unleashed on Jacob. It was time. Still anxious about the message from God the night before, Jacob arranged his family behind him, and off he limped towards his doom, bowing to the ground many, many times. Well, is it him? Esau was excited now. It looked like him. If only he would stop bowing enough for me to get a really good look. It is him. It's Jacob. To this day, nobody in the camp of Edom had ever seen their master run so fast to greet someone with such love and passion. Esau had found his long-lost brother, and still grovelling, Jacob was pleased to still be alive. To his enormous surprise, Esau had not killed him. Relief was his dominant feeling, that and some happiness. They were never really alike, but they are brothers, and it's good to be talking again. But he's probably still pretty hot-headed, still alive in a moment. Esau is still probably a live-in-the-moment sort of guy, and that makes him dangerous. Time to move on and let this reunion, this reconciliation stand. There's no need to push the boundaries too much right now. So despite Esau's urging to stick together, they split up again, only to meet one more time as equals when they got together to bury their father. Jacob, overthinking and anxious about meeting the brother he deceived, and Esau, who it would appear had got over that whole deception thing around the blessing and just wanted to see his brother again. They were reconciled mostly through the acceptance and forgiveness of Esau. So reconciliation in families can be like that. The most unexpected things can sometimes happen, and we need to be ready and willing to roll with it. And like Jacob, know when there's been enough of a good thing, because small steps are usually a good size for reconciliation. So reconciliation in a family takes motivation for reconciliation, time, truth-telling conversations, forgiveness, recognition of your own mistakes, acceptance of other people's mistakes, more forgiveness, and an ability to know when enough has been done for now. And now it's time for us to enjoy the ultimate symbol of reconciliation between us and God, the symbols of life and death of Jesus in a meal together.